lessons that we've learned from all other earlier institutions. Honorable Member Amar Singh rightly asked the question saying, do we know why all those institutions failed? This House doesn't have the information. No, I think periodically this House has been getting the information as to why some banks couldn't perform, why some developmental institutions did not continue to be development institutions. They moved over to become regular commercial banks. As a result, every such experiment which had happened earlier resulted in such changes, all of which have been studied before forming this institution. So this institution has really acquired that unique character only because it has been tailored in such a way that it gets over all the handicaps which other institutions, earlier institutions faced. This may not face, and this hopefully has been really come out of all the learnings that we have done as the government. So this, before I get into the uniqueness of this institution, I want to say infrastructure financing, project financing long term, all have a very high risk element. The credit costs are very high. The long-term assessment of the success of the project is also on grounds which are not so establishable in terms of data, in terms of prior success rates. Each project may be unique for itself, and therefore the failure possibilities are also high when you take up funding for these sort of institutions. And if the asset and the way in which the current situation has become is the commercial banks, the scheduled commercial banks, which borrow in the short term and started lending for the long term projects, ended up with asset liability mismatch, all of which is in the public domain. And we know how a space which should have been occupied by development financial institutions gradually got filled in by the commercial banks, who did not in their core business activity have anything to do with the long-term financing. As a result, the absence of the long-term financing institution was felt. Equally, the asset liability mismatch of the commercial banks also started standing out. In both ends, we started losing. A third institution, set of institutions, the non-banking financial companies, started coming and performing what the scheduled commercial banks had to do, other than what they were doing in terms of spreading and reaching out to far-flung areas. So all these together have given us a set of learnings based on which we've given a structure to this current institution. Now, it's also true equally that in India, the corporate bond market is not really mature, it is not deep enough. So we are in no position to say, no, the bond market can adequately take care of our financing needs for long-term projects, and therefore you can bank on that and leave the rest to be worried about by the bond market itself. No, the bond market in India is not yet ready for that. Therefore, the twin problems have resulted in a situation that you need to have a specific institution which can finance development and also projects in this country. And all the honorable members are aware that in the budget of 2019-20, we had very clearly announced that 100 lakh crore will be invested in infrastructure pipeline, which was announced by the year 2019 December itself, had more than 6,500 projects, greenfield and brownfield, all working to an estimated cost of 111 lakh crores. And obviously, that is the kind of money which is required for India's infrastructure building, that purely public funding alone cannot meet. From taxpayers' money, that kind of money only for building the infrastructure of the country. If we depend only on the taxpayers' money and the government's resource, this might take 100 years by the time we can even reach all the 6,000 projects. So, through the establishment of this unique organization, we think from the NIP, the kind of funding which is required for it, this DFI will probably meet about 8 to 10% of what is expected to meet the expenditure of the NIP itself. I said this institution is very unique. because it meets both developmental objectives and also financial objectives. And in this, global institutional investors, as much as domestic retail investors, will also participate, and the monies which are expected to be raised from sovereign funds all over the world, and also from any other big investors who want to invest in India, will all be drawn towards this institution because of the governance structure that we are giving it and the management structure which we are giving it. It will have a single-tier governance structure in the form of a board of directors. Now, equal representation of government and independent directors on the board will be given. Board appointment. I recall member Sunita Duggal had very clearly, elaborately mentioned about how the board will appoint key on the recommendation of the Bank Board Bureau, and safeguards will be provided even for decisions which are commercially viably taken, which may lead to questions about why certain decisions have been taken, and inadequately informed prosecutions will not be entertained. And in this, I think it's important for me to say that the appointment of the chairman may be done by the Government of India, but the MDs and DMDs are going to be appointed on the basis of recommendation by the Bank Board Bureau, which will then get vetted, which I remember recalling Shri Honorable Member Jane Sinha also mentioning that it will be vetted and finalized by the Nomination and Remuneration Board, the NRC of the board, and the appointments will be made by the board itself. Now, one specific data about how much is being given as equity by the Government of India is something which I'd like to bring to the notice, because I think there is a bit of a confusion between 5,000 crores and 20,000 crores. 20,000 crores is the equity Government of India is providing, and that was announced in the budget. A 5,000 crore grant is being given because that is approved by the cabinet also, that for reducing the cost of funds in lieu of potential cost savings expected from issue of tax-free bonds. So the 5,000 is a grant, whereas 20,000 crore is the equity which is being given, that was announced in this year's budget, 21-22 budget. And they can also access line of credit from the RBI directly. Besides this, other notable features of the bill, which I'll very quickly recall, are that it will have a framework wherein the RBI will be enabled to issue regulations for granting licenses to other infra-focused DFIs, which may be set up by anybody else other than the governments. So in the private area also, RBI can issue. Then income tax for such institutions which are being licensed by the RBI, which may be in the not government but in the private area, maybe income tax exemptions for providers will be for such institutions for 5 years is being given, whereas for this one we've given it for 10 full years. The institution and other private DFIs will operate this institution, and other DFIs in the private area will all operate within the prudential framework of the RBI as applicable to all India financial institutions as AIFI. So this institution will also the institution will also play as a dispute, it will play a role towards dispute resolution in the field of infrastructure financing. So because there is a provision for private DFI, we expect a very healthy competition for the public DFI that is being set up now through today's bill. I think because of the separation of ownership and supervisory role of the government, there is a high degree of efficiency that we expect to see in its functioning. Other than this, one or two things which I like to highlight, because majority of the members have certainly captured the essential features which are being said through the statute which is being laid before you today. One thing, of course, is very clear: this institution shall not be listed because of the very nature of the business that they're doing. I've also mentioned that fiscal support that we're offering exemption from income tax for 10 years, 5,000 as grant, concessional guarantee fee of 0.1% of the sovereign guarantee, provision of grants and contributions from government in the future, provision for full or partial support for hedging costs, which was also mentioned by two members. Supriya Suleji also mentioned about it. Now, monetary support which is available is they can borrow directly from RBI for up to 90 days. They can also borrow from the RBI against the bills of exchange maturing within 5 years. Statutory liquidity ratio status for bonds issued by this institution to be separately considered by RBI. Pension and insurance regulators to categorize bonds issued by this institution as approved investment. So these are the essential features. I said this institution will not be listed. It's only because this is a long-term funding institution, low margin business, and it's not amenable for reporting every quarterly its results. So these are lessons that we've learned from the IDFC's experiences. Some very pertinent questions were raised by few of the members. I would like to answer them. Supriya ji raised this question about, will you be able to give sovereign guarantee when Government of India goes down to 26%? Because now we have 100% ownership, gradually it will be reduced to 26%, but we don't envisage any time being lower than 26%. 26 is where we eventually, sometime, long time afterwards, we'll reach. But the question that Supriya ji had asked was, will you be able to give sovereign guarantee if, say, you reached 26% level? Yes, we will be able to give, because the provision of sovereign guarantee is not linked to the extent of your presence there, not extent of GOI stake. It is the act itself, and therefore that is where the strength comes in. Then it's a statutorily provided institution, and therefore it gets the cover, whereas the private one is not statutorily. Yeah, but you're sitting there with 26%.
I don't want to take the House's time. Maybe we can talk about it another
sure.
time. I think it's everybody.
And again, you had questioned, and as much the same question was raised by Honorable Member Amar Singh also, saying at one point in time you had this one extreme and you've gone to the other extreme. Why do you want to do it? Why don't you go through the middle path? This is actually taking the middle path. If on the one hand you said CBI, CBC and CAG will all be looking at your decisions and therefore you're accountable, and the other extreme which appears to you as there's no oversight at all, is not right. This, because it's being created by the statute which all of us are going to be passing today, hopefully, and I request all members to kindly pass it, is a statutorily provided institution. It will be answerable to the Parliament. It will be absolutely answerable to the Parliament. So we are not going to one extreme to the other extreme where there's no oversight at all. But that heavy, fear of taking decisions as a result of oversight over oversight over oversight, overlapping over oversight, is now being given space wherein legitimate commercial decisions can be taken, professionally taken, through a board-run institutions be taken, and the board, being appointed by professionals themselves, will be a lot more independent. And as I said earlier, there is a separation of government control and government ownership and government decision making. So the decision making here runs through a complete professional route, and therefore this complete lack of answerability, lack of absence of transparency is not right. They are going to be answerable to the Parliament. So that's where I think most of the issues have been addressed. I think hopefully I've answered all the questions. So, Honorable Chairperson, sir, with that I would say I request the House to pass this bill.